Hello, everybody, and welcome to this CUGH satellite webinar on local participation, leadership, and recognition in global health research. My name is Nadia Samagudu, and I will be working along with my colleagues here to present this satellite and to really encourage great discussion on this topic. So what we are going to do is talk about local participation, leadership, and recognition in global health research. And we are trying to discuss this from a perspective of Global South authors. So what I will do now focuses on global issues with inequity in global health research and the ways in which local contributors in the Global South can facilitate equitable participation, recognition, and leadership. Now, these will be discussed in the areas of scientific authorship, especially in international collaborations between the Global North and Global South, and as regards engaging indigenous knowledge and contributors to global health research. Now, this satellite attempts to focus more on what local contributors to global health research in the Global South can do to increase equitable participation, recognition, and leadership. Now, we use the terms Global North, also known as high-income countries or resource-rich settings, and Global South, also known as low and middle-income countries or resource-limited settings for convenience, as these terms in and of themselves may be problematic. We also know that people live in mixed settings and that even within high-income countries, there are marginalized areas and people who do exist in inequitable conditions. This satellite theme is consistent with the decolonization agenda, but we recognize that what we are discussing here is just a small part of that process. So we'll focus on 4 key papers written by author groups that include some of our panelists. And these open access papers were linked on our registration site and on the flyer, so you can access them if you haven't already. I will introduce our panelist authors, and our moderators will introduce themselves and their discussants. I will start first with Munira Rashid, who is a clinical psychologist who focuses on early child education and development. She's also involved in activism for the decolonization of global health. She's a former global health faculty at the Aga Khan University, Pakistan, and is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Bergen in Norway. Professor Dhananjaya Sharma is head of the Department of Surgery of the Government Medical College and Allied Hospitals affiliated to MP Medical Sciences University in Jabalpur, India. He is committed to lifelong activism and campaigning for appropriate technology for healthcare in the developing world. Dr. Angela Obasi, unfortunately, could not be with us today. She's unavoidably absent due to acute illness, but she's a senior clinical lecturer at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine in the UK. Her research interests include exploring broader determinants of adolescent reproductive health. She's also an advocate for equity and human rights in health. Professor Refilwe Masekela is a pediatric pulmonologist and head of the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health, University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. Her research interests focus on lung health, especially asthma, in children in Africa and in access to care. She's a steering committee member of the Global Asthma Network and the vice president of the Pan-African Thoracic Society. And last but not least, for our speaker panelist, Dr. Shea Abimbola also could not be here today. He's unavoidably absent, but he's a health systems researcher and a senior lecturer in global health at the University of Sydney, Australia. He's the editor-in-chief of the BMJ Global Health and the current Prince Claus Chair in Development and Equity at Utrecht University, focusing on justice in global health research. So that said, we're going to go ahead and start with panel 1, where we will have Professor Matiange Sirleaf as the moderator. So I'll hand this over to Matiange.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here with you all, well, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, tonight. to talk about this fascinating paper and to be in conversation with Dr. Penny Holding. I am the Nathan Patz Professor of Law at the University of Maryland School of Law. And Dr. Penny Holding is a consultant and does a number of really interesting things in the global public health space, and will be our discussant panelist. And I'm the moderator panelist. So I don't want to take up too much time from getting into the meat of today's discussion. Our paper presenter is Munira Rashid, and she has already been introduced. And so I'll just turn things over to her. After she presents, we will have some moderated discussion and then open it up hopefully for a number of questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Dr. Mathenge and Dr. Penny. Let me share my screen. I hope it's visible. So my paper was part of, like the link was shared on the PDF. Before I move into the actual slides, I wanted to say before I start that what I have written in the paper is a personal account, and when talking about violence or talking about the role of investigators or institutions in the South, it's not where I started. It actually has been kind of conclusion of all the experiences, and it's when I started to move, when I realized how I was changed. So this is how this paper it came into place, or how I kind of wrote about it. So why do we need to decolonize? I think the discourse on decolonization has really moved forward in the past 1 year or 2 years. But from my personal perspective, what I felt was it's kind of system that's unfair. I was feeling we promise something else to the community, but on the ground, decisions that are taken and people are empowered, sometimes they're not empowered to do so. It's not everything what the decisions that are taken are not those that are working in the best interest of the communities. And that made me really uncomfortable. And this is where I started talking about it. And then I started reading about these things. And we know that the field of global health is not achieving what it's supposed to achieve, and it kind of upholds the very values of inequities that it claims to address. And one of those inequities that we're talking about today is in terms of authorship, leadership, and recognition of the investigators or the leaders in the global South or in low-income countries. But we also realize that the system is unfair in a way that it's benefiting a selected group of individuals. Majority may be in the high income settings, but there are also some in the low and middle income settings. There's a proverb in my language, you can clap only with two hands. The inequities in global health, if you talk about specifically authorship, it's not because only one side is clapping. There are people in our part of the world who are also benefiting from the system or are facilitating the maintenance of this system. Why did I talk about this word? I've had many feedback or comments about why have I used the word violent, because I think the process that I went through and then I went upon and read about historically, the process of power transfer has been violent, whether it's in the context of colonization or even giving away power. People can resort to being violent, and also because power is never given willingly. It is always you have to ask for it. And in the quest to retain power, the ones holding it can resort to violent strategies. And again, the ones holding the power are not just in one setting. They may be majority in the high income settings, but there are many that I saw or I experienced or observed in our part of the world as well, or in my part of the world as well. And why does it make the decolonization a complex process in LMICs? So to begin with, the motivation for change will be greatest among the individuals who are the most vulnerable and who are suffering the most. And usually the one who suffers the most are the ones who are the most vulnerable. And these are people, they are young and middle-aged investigators in low and middle income settings. And when as I've been saying, there are also people or there are also organizations in LMICs who are also benefiting from it. And so when you talk about a shift in the system, that doesn't mean just one part of the system. It also has to be like the partnership, the collaborations between HIC and LMIC. You also have to push them furthermore. You have to ask them to come out of their comfort zones. And that makes it really, really complex for the vulnerable, because then you're fighting at two fronts within your own institutions, within your own organizations, but also with the collaborators who are already empowered enough or who already hold power and privilege. So what can we do to aid the process of decolonization? As per or what my experience has been, we need to build a community of support. It cannot be a person leading it. Of course, there's one person who leads within one agenda, but then is to strengthen yourself, you need to find a community. And I found similar people on like social media. This is how I found Dr. Nadia and others who are on the panel. We need to find allies with not just vulnerable stakeholders in LMICs or in the global south, but the system, since it is unfair, and what I have been trying to understand or reflecting, there are also people, or there are also investigators and academics who are also being hurt by this very system. For example, women in high income settings, we also know that equitable leadership doesn't exist between men and women, and there are high gender inequities. There are young investigators who also not feel as comfortable or who are not as empowered, people of color within this high income setting. I think that's a good way of finding community, finding allies who can work for the same cause. And then we need to build a strategic narrative around what needs to change, where, and it has to change in both sides. It has to change the high income settings. Where can they push their own organizations, their own institutions, where and how they need to change, but also at our end, we also need to understand how do we better ask for our rights, how do we empower our own employees, or how do we mentor them better, how do we mentor them effectively, how can we gradually end our dependency on the investigators or on the capacity strengthening, capacity building that we talk about from the high income settings. These are some of the responsibilities that institutions, that mentors, that leaders within LMICs have to take on. They have to show greater responsibility and accountability when it comes to empowering or protecting our own investigators. And for me, I think the ask has to be like you build a system that is fair and just across the different aspects. I do not want it to become a card that I use, that because I'm a woman, I'm in an LMIC, this is just to give me a token and I can get along with it. But I think that's not what we're asking for. We are asking for a system that is transparent. We're asking for a system that is built on merit. We're asking for a system that can be fair and just to everybody. And it also tries to empower those who we have not been fair to those, and those structural inequities that we have created and that we use to argue for lack of capacity. I think this is where we also then have to strengthen the argument or the narrative that we are trying to build. And moving forward, we have to realize that change doesn't come just by writing. It just doesn't come by moving the discourse. It also has to come by building relationships. It has to be every conversation that we have, every conversation, every talk, every person we talk to, we try to influence, and we have to practice what we preach. If we are trying to speak against the inequities, then we also have to be the one who are not practicing those inequities within whatever power that we hold within our systems, within our roles, whatever roles we have as faculty or as roles as journal editors. I think this is bit by bit that we drop by drop that will bring change in the big system. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I think we have some poll questions from your paper that we're populating in the chat. Is that correct? So Munir, would you like us to just to walk the participants through the different poll questions?
Yeah, sure. So what we have tried to do is we have had statements, and we would like you to like it's a multiple choice, but it's like at scale. So you have 4 options. Either you completely agree with the statement, or you agree, or you disagree, or you completely disagree. And these statements are all around by the manuscript or the paper that I've written. For example, the first statement is vulnerability to a decolonization paradigm shift in global health research is equally spread across the globe. So you can select one of these options here that's given.
Okay, so for the first prompt, vulnerability to decolonization, paradigm shift in global health research is equally spread across the globe. The majority, 57% of you disagreed with this statement. 17% of you agreed, and 17% of you completely disagreed. So more disagreement with that statement than agreement. For the second, in the process of decolonization of global health, people are responsible for their trauma. 60% of you disagreed, 23% of you completely disagreed. So again, the majority of you disagreed with that statement. And then the third, disruptive actions are necessary for stimulating a paradigm shift in global health research. 47% of you agree, 10% of you disagree, 3% of you disagree, 40% completely agree. So a little bit more proximity in terms of the disagreement. And then the fourth question, there is no strategic process or path to change that is nonviolent. 60% of you disagree, and 23% of you agree. Last question, trauma is inevitable in the process of decolonization of global health research. And a bit mixed here, completely agree, 13% agree, 43% disagree, 40%. And so this is a great way of just showing where we all are in terms of some of these formative statements and to get your perspective since we're not able to see you. And I think it gives us a great platform for launching into our discussion. Munira, I don't know if you wanted to react to any of the results.
No, I think it's what I was expecting, but I think the last one was pretty interesting. People think there are non-violent ways or being strategic about the process. And even the fourth one, I think majority believe there needs to be disruption if we have to decolonize the process. It will be interesting what people think of disruption, what can be a disruptive activity or a task, and how do we do it.
Sure. So I think we can open it up, well, not open it up, have our moderated discussion right now involving Dr. Penny Holding, Munira, and myself in conversation. And so we've had a robust exchange on how to think about some of the things to sort of probe this discussion. And so one of the places I think that we want to start is just thinking about, what are the benefits of decolonization for global health research? And really, Munira's paper and presentation get to the heart of sort of who bears the burden of that. And so, Munira, I wanted to hear from you and also Dr. Penny Holding on thoughts here.
Dr. Penny, would you like to go first?
Well, it's an interesting jumping off point too is the answers to that poll, which to me, it left me feeling that people are a little bit confused because on the one hand, there's clearly a hope that transition and change can come about non-violently, but everybody seemed to recognize the fact that it was inevitable to have some form of trauma. And trauma, of course, is violent. You don't follow trauma from a non-violent act. So I guess what I'm asking you, Munira, is do you sense this as a confusion, from your own experience? Do you sense that there is a hope that things can be different, but they just aren't? How do you? I know that's a bit of a tricky question, but
I think it's based on what I would think is lessons learned. If I look back, and I would think there could be ways to reduce I would say, either the violence or the traumatic experience. There were people who helped me, and they were really the support, but still it was traumatic. But my community, after this paper, interestingly, and a bit before it as well, I think even the community on social media and a discourse that happened in the conversations that you have and how people validate you, that in itself has been a healing process. And this is why I think the first step, or that I wrote, a first action, is we need to build a community. And you need to be, visibility really actually somehow gives you that validation, that and that makes people, or your own, or people who are trying to sabotage your careers or image, they also start seeing you differently. So you're not vulnerable person or individual anymore, but you're someone who has a track record, who knows people, who has certain sense of or certain level of credibility. And so it's not that easy to question you or to judge you, because the trauma comes from people using um, the fact that you're based in MIC, you don't have a PhD yet, and you're a woman, so you're not credible enough. And so I think that's where they start. This is where the power imbalance happens, and that's what take advantage of. So if you start, then how do you bring alternate forms of building that allies or that community where you are seen as someone who knows their work, or someone who's credible, or someone who has a community who's visible? I think that's where strategically that can help somehow to reduce the trauma that happens. And what happened with me was I didn't plan anything. It just happened. It just played out. But if I was to strategically think of it, or something that I had planned, probably it would have been different. But I think now these conversations are more open, or people are more writing about it. People may be more prepared, or planning better to deal with such issues. Yeah, that's from me.
Your comments also just made me think about how we conceptualize violence, right? And so in the response to the poll also seems to be, I don't know if it's a confusion, but just there might not be a broad understanding of violence, right? And what violence means, and how we think about sort of structural violence, and how we connote harm. And so if we're thinking about violence in sort of just sort of direct bodily integrity harm, as opposed to harm that is physical, that harm that is mental, harm that is sort of psychic harm, and stressors, harm through vulnerability, harm that's structural, right? So there's a number of ways of thinking about violence that, depending on how you conceptualize violence, narrowly or broadly, can inform whether you think that the process of decolonization is one that necessitates some form of violence, and how are those, if we think about burdens, right, and how the burdens of trauma and the like are shared or not shared as per the poll response. What are we to do in terms of moving forward with the process of decolonization? So lots of food for thought here. Dr. Penny Holden, did you have any reflections that you wanted to share?
Could I just ask you to refer to me as Penny instead of my full name? That would be a little bit more comfortable, thank you. Well, you brought up, I think, a very important issue there about how we take certain issues, what we take certain labels to mean, how we visualize them, how we feel them. And, that first question is nicely put, because it uses the word vulnerability. It doesn't use the word victimization. Victimization is a lot clearer. And I think if that had been there, I think we probably would have had everybody disagree that the victimization is very much more skewed. But vulnerability, brings in people losing something that they had before. Whether they should have had it or not is not the issue. They're still vulnerable in a shift to losing something. And so I guess the thought that comes into my head here that I'd like to hear from both of you about is the conversation around what people lose in a paradigm shift and how much attention should be paid to people losing a position or losing a perception of power. If we actually want to really generate a shift. So should we care about what people are losing? I believe that we should care about it, because otherwise they're just going to hold on to it and not let go of whatever power they had. But I know other people disagree, that if you're holding on to something that you shouldn't have had in the first place, you should just put up with it. Those are the two kind of extremes. How do you guys feel?
Munira, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I would agree. I think when you're vulnerable, you do lose a lot. And still, there are days when I think about what I lost. And it can be sometimes, it may not, sometimes not something tangible, in the process when it happens. And you're singled out because you speak. And I've been speaking to Dr. Nadia as well about it. And the mobbing, or how the system builds up against you, people stop talking to you. You are being excluded from what's happening, or from important meetings or celebrations. People don't want to have lunch with you. Even, I mean, those things, they may not sound like you're losing a paper, you're losing a project, or but those things also matter when you're a part of a community and you're being excluded. And that was hard. It was not easy, to 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 deal with that trauma, I would say, and to be isolated. And I may have lost maybe opportunities in the field, or probably what I was working in parenting, and I have to maneuver my way through it. But somehow decolonization is like an agenda that has been thrown into my lap. But I think it has given me a reason or a purpose, and the reason that I wrote it was not just for myself. I think it was for many people who are not privileged enough to speak, and who will be losing if someone doesn't validate their experience. And if I have put in guidelines, it can move the discourse forward. That can be helpful to them. When I was going through this traumatic experience, I read a paper in the Lancet was published, and some very similar experiences by a Norwegian writer, Katerine Strong. And just reading that paper gave me so much strength that I was not wrong, or I was not crazy, and these things do happen. And that was one of the reasons I wrote, because if I got strength from someone's experience, maybe someone gets strength from my experience, and it helps reduce the pain or the trauma that I've been through, because I didn't know what was happening around. But maybe there are people who can benefit from it.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, to your question, Penny, not taking all the way the honorifics, but yeah, to your question, I am less concerned in my own work in terms of sort of centering those who already have power, and sort of am more concerned about thinking about how how structures of power have been used to subordinate in global health, in global public health, in international law, and the like, and thinking about how to create a paradigm shift through sort of coalition building of those who have historically been subordinated. And so to the extent that conversations on decolonization tend to focus on, well, how can we sort of appease those who are in power to tell them that, this is actually beneficial for you, and how can we get sort of buy-in from powerful actors and institutions and the like. That is a conversation that, certainly needs to be had. It's just not the conversation that I'm most interested in having. And so there is work to do in that space. It's just not the work that I'm willing to do, because I find that work is also vital. Part of it is sort of in trying to convince those in power that through the benefits that have accrued through no sort of work on their own, unjust benefits, unjust enrichment, unjust whatever, that that positionality is something that needs to be challenged. And I think that it's the work of others to sort of do that informing, but it's just not the work of, in my experience and my belief, it's not the work of historically subordinated people to do that work. And so, yes, the work needs to be done. I just don't know that I need to carry the burden, or other similarly situated people need to carry that burden of doing that sharing. So anyway, I realize that I'm reflecting too long, and I don't want to miss an opportunity to open things up for questions. So we have 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get other participants in. And so the chat is open. If you have a question.
So yeah, as you're opening it up, for me, the difficulty there is that the option is appeasement. I don't see that appeasement is necessary or required. So pulling people into letting go is not about appeasement in my head. So I think that for me is the interesting conversation to have, is about when you're going to create real change and you're going to avoid people being isolated, as Munira described, that there are other avenues. There are the ones that you're describing about creating a new agenda and creating a new collaboration. But I would categorically state that the work of appeasement is actually not appropriate.
Okay,
so I would concur with you on that. I don't think it's anybody's job to appease. I think there's another piece of work that needs to happen that should not be labeled as appeasement.
Excuse me. So we have a couple minutes left. I don't want to take up too much time going back and forth with you on this. And so if there are any other questions for Munira, for her paper, that would be great. If not, I'm happy to pose some of the other questions that we had. And so, Munira, I was curious in reading your piece in terms of thinking about guidelines for those in the Global South, who you see as sort of interlocutors in those guidelines. When you were writing the guidelines in the piece, who were you writing the guidelines in mind with?
So the summary of of my experience was, nobody really cares about you. Nobody really cares if you're being bullied. Nobody cares if you are not named on the paper, even if you talk to authorities, even if you go to the right avenues. Nobody really wants to be uncomfortable for you. And the investigators in such collaborations who are based in LMIC are the ones who are suffering the most. And you might have read about recent happening at Wellcome Trust Malawi as well, something very similar. And so at the end of the day, it is a choice that you have to make. Either you are in pain due to the collaboration or partnership, or you have to speak and see what happens and take the risk of being free or having the right to respect and dignity. And when you start doing that, you know what happens in the process, and people don't like it when you challenge them or you want them to push them out of their comfort zones. And there are different ways. Then they start questioning. When you question someone, they're going to question you back, and you are in a very vulnerable position when you're an employee. And there are so many ways the system or people around you or the leadership or your managers can get back to you. So these guidelines are for those individuals who think what they want is they have enough of the bullying or enough of unfair treatment, and they want recognition. They don't want to speak. So what are some of the things that they have to take care about when they are on this journey? It's not a choice. This is something that's going to happen. It was just in anticipation that I wrote it for them. If they're lucky or they're blessed and fortunate, it may not happen. But the reality is sometimes these things do happen. And it's part of academia anyways. Bullying is part of it, and with the colonial lens, I think it becomes even more detrimental to individuals who are vulnerable.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. So Professor Sharma, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Munira, I'm very sorry to know that you had to undergo this type of discrimination. My comment is actually that it is very poor leadership from the department's head. I have been heading my department. Close to 80 people work in my department. And I have been very particular about it, that the people coming from modest backgrounds, people coming from non-English speaking background, we have a lot of students coming from very, very modest background. They struggle to speak even in our vernacular language because they are very shy, coming from very modest backgrounds. It is for me to provide a level playing field for them and make sure that they play center stage. And like I say in football terms, I want them to play right in, not left out. So it is for me to ensure no discrimination takes place, and I have to make sure that I love teaching these guys to come up. You know, this is my job. So what I gather from your point of view was that there was poor leadership, because the leader has to set the tone. It is his or her job. And that person should have made sure that you are playing, you know, right in rather than left out. I feel bad about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. You're absolutely right. It's all about the leadership at the end of the day. And there's a long story to it. I did say those things to my manager. This is why things had probably blew up. But I think had not that happened, I wouldn't be sitting here with all of you and sharing my experiences and moving the discourse forward. This is probably how it was supposed to be. I think I started.
When we were younger, in first year, when you come to medical school, we were subjected to ragging, physical abuse, all types of things. But with passage of time, all these things have gone away or should have gone away. And that is the job of the senior people in leadership position, to see that people coming in are welcomed rather than discriminated against in any way. Thank you. But I'm sorry that you had to undergo such discrimination. I'm feeling bad.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for being empathetic and feeling my pain, which has reduced quite a bit. But yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Munira, for willing to be so vulnerable with all of us and sharing your insights in writing and also now just in person. I think we've all been enriched and gained so much from you and from your experience. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Nadia.
Great, thank you, Matiange, and thank you, Munira and Penny, for your comments. I mean, you know, we're starting this with a very personal story from your end, very personal and painful, and we appreciate that you've shared it with us. Right now, we're going to move to panel 2, where we will be discussing we're shifting a little bit to discuss about authorship, a call for reforms in global health publications, and then also using scientific authorship criteria as a tool for equitable inclusion in global health research. I remember that I hadn't even introduced myself, but I'm an infectious diseases pediatrician at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and then a senior technical advisor at the Institute of Human Virology, Nigeria. My research focuses on the application of implementation science to develop and scale up sustainable interventions for major infectious diseases affecting children in African studies. But then again, in the doing of the research, you realize that there are a lot of other areas, and we won't call them soft necessarily or non-scientific, but very relevant areas in terms of relationships and hierarchy and non-violence and protection that need to be discussed in order for good research and research being done by people who are feeling safe and valued. And so I'm going to move on to discussing panel 2, where we will have our first panelist, Professor Sharma, who has already been introduced. We were to have Dr. Shea Abimbola as part of this, but unfortunately he could not be here. I am moderating and I'll also discuss. And then we have another discussant panelist, Professor Michael Cotton, who is the editor-in-chief of the Primary Surgery and the Tropical Doctor Journals. He was the inaugural professor of clinical practice at the Namibia University of Science and Technology Medical School, Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, and has served in multiple roles in medical education in Zimbabwe. So we'll also welcome Professor Michael Cotton to discuss. But before we do that, we will go ahead and have Professor Sharma present his PowerPoint based on his paper that is calling for reforms in global health publications. After that, we'll have a poll related to, and we will have a discussion. So after that, we'll have a second presentation from myself on our paper. And then after that, we'll have a poll and then the moderated discussion. So please go ahead, Professor Sharma, and present your paper.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My paper is a very short one. It's a call for reforms in global health publication. This was the paper written some time ago. And the question is, why do we need reforms? So what happens when you submit a paper to an elite journal? What really happens is that you get a very sweet note that thank you very much. It's a very nice paper, blah, 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 blah. And sorry, we have a shortage of space and we can accept only 5%, 7% of papers being submitted to us. And very sweet note, very sweet note. You almost believe that they are feeling bad for you. But when you get enough of these notes, you start realizing it's just, a standard thing which is being sent to you. So why we need reforms? Because we are not represented there. We are the major stakeholders. Global health is all about people who are connected to the ground, not people who come like a helicopter and do some research, write about it and disappear. So we are actually getting marginalized. That is the first point. Second problem, which is even bigger, is the colonial mindset of the authors. We ourselves are to be blamed to a large extent because we want to publish in these elite journals. Because, we want to have that bragging rights. I published in ABC, I published in XYZ, something like that. That mindset is what is forcing you to submit your best papers to these journals again and again and again and get those sweet letters of rejections. So that is the second problem. And what I like to call is 10 to 90% paradox. If I submit 100 papers to elite journals, maybe 10 would be accepted. But if I submit 100 papers to my own national journal, 90% of those would be accepted because they are my target audience. They know what I want to write. They want to read what I'm writing. So this is the 10-90% paradox I want to draw your attention to, that when we submit to elite journals, we have not even 10% chance of getting accepted. So everybody knows this. Local authors should write about local issues for local audience, and they should write in local journals. So everything is connected. Local authors, local issue, local journals, local audience in local language. You speak to your own people about your own issues, trying to find a solution here. And what is happening is when I publish in Indian Journal of Surgery, it is accessible by our 27,000 members, free.
All right, Prof. Sharma, can you put your slides in present, please? And
okay.
And advance them. I think there are some people who cannot see them.
Okay. Let me
go back. On the
here.
first slide.
Yeah. Starting from here. Now, can you see the change?
Not
Is
yet.
The first slide or the second slide? No?
No, we do not see that.
Now? First slide or second slide?
It's still stuck in slide mode, not present mode. So you may have to put it in present mode first.
Okay. Now let us try this. Is
okay.
Changing now?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for pointing it out, and my apologies for not anticipating this. The bigger the audience, the greater are the chances of jinx like this. So we have a big audience today, that means. Okay. So need for call for reforms. These are the reasons we are getting marginalized, colonial mindset of the authors. We keep submitting our papers to elite journals where the chances are not even 10%. And if we submit in local journals, writing on local issues for local audience, local language, they go to thousands of households. Indian Journal of Surgery, we have 27,000 members of our national association. If I write in this, it gets delivered in their inbox. If I write in Journal of Indian Medical Association, we have more than 300,000 members. So I have direct connection here, but because my mindset is colonial, I am submitting my papers repeatedly. I remember one of my papers I revised 4 times, and even after that, after 8 months, it was still rejected. It broke my heart. And I was very young and I was very upset at that time, very upset. So this is what I would like to draw your attention to. And while the reforms are needed, while it is being done, what reforms are needed? We need representation in the whole system, editorial board, associate editor, everything. So our voice is clearly and loudly heard. Second is we need a level playing field. Remove these glass ceilings. I'm at the end of my career and I have hurt my head many times banging my head against these glass ceilings. Some of them I have gone through, but many I could not. I expect the younger generation to break those glass ceilings. I'm tired now, but these glass ceilings should be removed. Finally, remove APC. This processing charges, they must disappear. They are obviously discriminating against us. So what they are telling is I can read those papers, but I cannot publish those papers in that journal because I don't have any money. And many times the APC, the charges are so much more than my monthly salary. How can I pay that charge? So until the reforms takes place, what should I do? I have a very simple and humble suggestion. Please strengthen your local journals by publishing in them. If you worry about the impact factors, why not increase the impact factor of your own journals? If I'm submitting my best paper to an elite journal and my shoddy paper to my local journal, it will never increase its impact factor. It is my responsibility to strengthen my own journal. So that is all I wanted to say. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. So I'm going to follow up with my presentation and then we'll have the poll and then our discussion after that. So I'll load up my slides now. So you can stop sharing and I can share my slides. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So what Shaya Bimbola and I wrote about is relevant to what Prof. Sharma just discussed, but we are looking at it now from a different angle as to how to be more included or expand authorship inclusion and authorship representation to local contributors. And so, as I said, Shea couldn't be here today, so I'll be presenting on our behalf. So some background to this, and our premise for this paper is that there are internationally available and applied authorship criteria, but that these same criteria are being used to exclude or obscure rather than to include Global South authors and their contributions. The ICMJE, and note, this committee is largely heavily Global North membership, created their standard criteria for authorship. They first created these criteria in 1985. The central principle for these criteria was that scientific authorship is an intellectual activity that entails contribution to ideas, analysis, writing, and ownership. Subsequently, revisions were added that added data acquisition and the need for all authors to be accountable for the work as part of the criteria. So as of today, the ICMJE authorship guidelines are based on meeting all of the following 4 criteria, not one, but all of them. First, substantial contributions to the concept and design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work. And number 2, drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content. And number 3, final approval of the version to be published. And number 4, agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. Now, while these guidelines are widely accepted, compliance is limited and interpretations vary, which has led to intentional or unintentional exclusion of authors, particularly for those in the Global South. So one of our key talking points in this paper was that leaders of international research collaboration should pay particular attention to the ORs in the criteria 1 and 2. Now, what do we mean? Criteria 1 is stated above. You see that it's to be able to check the box for 1, you have substantial contributions to the conception of the work, or the design, or acquisition, or analysis, or interpretation. So there are many ways in which this box can be checked. For that number 1, not all of them have to be checked, but at least 1, because there's the function of or in that statement. Now, data acquisition is where Global South staff typically make the bulk of their contribution. If the work is happening in your locality and you are engaged in this research, most of the work that is done by Global South staff, or the major reason why Global South staff even get to contribute to these studies, is in collecting the data. Now, where Global South or LMIC authors often lack robust contribution, either by intention or circumstance, is data analysis. We all understand this. You're the one who collects the data, you submit it. It might be analyzed in country, maybe partially, but by a statistician or other person, or it is sent abroad and magic happens to it. And down the line, you see that there is a paper. Okay, so often where we lack contribution from LMIC or Global South is in the analysis. Now, in discussing all of it, note that in addressing capacity building needs, whether for data analysis or other things, in high income and low middle income collaborations, one should be careful not to assume that the capacity deficit lies exclusively among the low and middle income country team members, i.e. the Global South, or that the high income country team members exclusively possess the requisite skills needed across the spectrum of the research. We should not make that assumption on either side. And we just wanted to make that point. So then the next thing we break down in the Criterion 1 is the data interpretation part. Now, this ought to be a collective exercise in international research partnership in which local team members are considered to have privileged knowledge, given their greater contextual exposure and expertise. And I want us not to limit the expertise to, because you're local or because you have local knowledge or you were born there or you live there or you have lived experience. We also have health expertise, scientific expertise, core expertise regarding the topic and the study. Now, this knowledge can be applied, that is our data interpretation knowledge, can be applied both for quantitative or qualitative data during data analysis, and is also relevant to the framing of the research question from the beginning, which then determines what data to acquire and what analysis to conduct. You can treat data multiple different ways, but how to treat the data will also be coming from knowledge and local knowledge or expertise that works into data interpretation. So hence, interpretation is integral to all other elements of Criterion 1, that is conception, design, data acquisition, and data analysis. Where local team members lack the skills to fully interpret the data, this too should be seen as an opportunity for capacity building. Now, for Criterion 2, drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content. This is the one that can easily and has easily been used to exclude, where an invitation is not even extended to deserving LMIC team members to contribute. Therefore, if you didn't contribute, you didn't check Criterion 2, and therefore you may not be listed as an author. So reasons for non-invitation from the team leadership may include perceived lack of writing or intellectual capacity, or lack of interest among the LMIC team members who may also undervalue scientific authorship or value it differently from those who are coming from high-income countries. This is another capacity building opportunity to build skills and thus to justify their inclusion. And lastly, but not least, there's an additional issue of interest and willingness of the LMIC partners to be involved in the writing or to be included as authors. In some cases, this might be due to less emphasis or less local emphasis on reward for scientific authorship for career progression, especially when the local contributors are in non-research health fields, or because the local contributors are so involved in other career activities, other non-research career activities, that they have little time or little protected time and resources to invest in academic writing and publishing. So some of the recommended solutions that we put forth in this paper, especially as the new normal in the COVID-19 era demonstrates, these tasks of data analysis, interpretation, and capacity building for these tasks where there's a gap can be conducted virtually. There's a lot that we are doing virtually. If there were no COVID-19, CUGH would not be occurring virtually, and yet here we are having a satellite with over 200 people from around the world. So these things can be done. So aspects of data analysis and interpretation can be completed and documented via email or via recorded virtual team meetings. It is not everything that needs to be pen to paper. Contributions can be made verbally and somebody else can document them. So relevant input during these virtual meetings can then be considered ICMJE criteria fulfilling author contributions from local and as well non-local team members. One other thing we put forth is that author contribution focus groups and similar strategies may work particularly well for the discussion section of a manuscript, which involves contextual interpretation of results. So the discussion can actually be done preliminarily, verbally and virtually, and then that be documented and articulated on paper, and then can be infused into the discussion section of whichever paper is under development. So I'm going to stop here and thank you for your attention, but now we are going to go and then discuss this in our moderated discussion. So what I'm going to do, just 1 second.
I don't see Professor Cotton.
Yes, let me see. He's not here yet. So what we might have to do is just discuss between I and the two of us, and then also invite other panelists here to contribute, and then open it to the wider participants, if that is okay with you, Prof. Sharma.
Yeah, sure. Or would you like me to make a phone call to him to remind him? He might be busy in the evening with some work. If you'll just start taking the first question, I'll just make a quick phone call and I'll be with you.
Okay.
Is that okay?
We can, what we can do, we first need to do the polls, and then I can take some audience questions in the interim if they would like to. So yeah, you can moderate the poll.
Make that phone call. Yeah, okay, good.
Yes. So can we have the polls put up, please? The poll for panel 2. All right, go ahead, Prof. Sharma.
I'm making the phone call. You want me to read?
Okay, so I will take the panel 2. I'll take the poll questions then.
Yeah, please do that.
So, okay, so I'm going to ask panelists to click their answers for these multiple choice questions. There are a few questions here. 4 questions. So, and these are all based on Prof. Sharma's presentation, not on mine. Mine I will discuss as part of the discussion. So first, why are reforms needed in the global health publication process? So select one answer. What is the colonial mindset of LMIC authors? Next is which reforms are needed? So all of these are per your opinion or your knowledge or what you think. And then last, what can LMIC authors do until reforms are implemented? So we'll give you a few moments to respond to that. Thank you.
Dr. Nadia, he's not taking the call. We'll go on with ourselves.
Okay, that sounds fine. So we'll give them a few moments to answer, and then so you can take over from here and review the answers when they come back.
Yeah, okay. So the first question is, I'll just repeat quickly, why are reforms needed? And you have the 4 options in front of you. And second is, what is the colonial mindset of a LMIC author? Again, you have the 4 options. Next one is, which reforms are needed? Again, you have 4 options. And finally, what can the local LMIC author do until the reforms are implemented? We have more than 40 participants. It should not take them much time to click. Do we have any queries on these questions? We can fill them while waiting.
I have a question at an appropriate moment to put to both of you, so let me know when I can ask it.
Yeah, please, please.
So you, Prof. Sharma, you talked about how you actually get a much higher readership and you reach the people who are possibly more interested if you don't go to the traditional journals. And so my question to both of you is, in terms of disseminating your results and getting your influencing people through your work, apart from journals, what other sources of dissemination do you favor in the paradigm shift away from the traditional methods?
Thank you. Actually, that is my favorite question to answer. Let me start with that. In today's time with social media, you really don't need these elite journals to disseminate. Once you have published, you have a DOI, you don't have to wait for anyone. You have your own social media, and in any case, your paper is going to be read by people who are interested. And those people, you already have a group and you are already in contact with them via the social media. So you have that option. You don't have to worry about the impact factor of the journal where you are publishing. If it is a journal which gives you a fair review, I'm talking about peer review and peer acceptance. Science starts with a theory, then you have conduct an experiment and the result you want to share. Those results are being audited by your peers. So that is the review part. And once they are published, you can disseminate the way you want. You don't have to worry about the impact factor of the journals, not anymore. I hope that's not a very too radical a thought for you to assimilate, but that is how I have started thinking. And this, although it was published in an elite journal like Lancet, the comment which we are discussing today, it was an invited comment. They have broken my heart too many times to submit on my own to them. It was an invited comment, so I submitted it. So now you have the power, and power is, in your hands. Click social media, click tweet, everybody reads it within minutes. And whosoever is interested can ask for a full paper, and I am happy to share with them.
Yeah, Prof. Sharma, so I want to continue on this point, really. Let's finish the poll because I want to come back and say and give some feedback to Penny as well. But please do go through the poll and then we can go forth from there.
Okay, so the answer to the first question is obviously the correct one, all of the above. Reforms are needed because local authors are excluded, underrepresented, and they face unfair bias from the editorial department. Second question is, what is the colonial mindset? The 62% feel all of the above, which I think is the correct answer, because we continue seeking publication in high impact journals as a trophy. Keep submitting despite repeated rejections. Their hearts are stronger than mine. Mine has been broken too many times. Avoid publications in their own national and local journals. They feel this is being snobbish to your own people. I don't think that's the correct answer. You have to strengthen your own journals. Now, the third one is, which reforms are needed? Again, 81% feel all of the above, which I think is the correct answer. Proper representation of LMIC, removal of bias, removal of glass ceiling, removal of APC. So all three are correct. So the correct answer would have been all of the above, which large number of have ticked. And what can LMIC authors do until reforms are implemented? Everybody agrees with me and they want to now strengthen the local journals by publishing them. You don't want to wait and watch. You don't want to continue submitting to elite journals. And APC, you are not going to sell your car and pay APC for a publication. So I think this is the correct answer. Now we can go for discussion. I think we can go for discussion.
Right. And because Penny has started something, I want to address that, and then we can move to discussing more. And we are flexible in basing the discussion on participant questions if there are a lot of participant questions to discuss. But Penny, you had said something about the dissemination. In what other ways could we disseminate? And Prof. Sharma was talking about you can disseminate by social media, other ways. It doesn't have to be through journals, but you have to understand, Prof. Sharma, as well, that in both LMIC and HIC institutions, those publications are very much a currency for career advancement. So even though as practitioners who want to share information for dissemination, for use in policies, practice, or to be the foundation for further research by other people, part of the currency of being an academic is to publish and publish in journals. I mean, until recently, there are still institutions that do not take op-eds as appropriate publications. They will not take blog posts as appropriate publications. They will not take anything that does not come in a scientific journal as appropriate publications. So while you want to share that information,
no.
You don't. No, I'm giving you the practical the practical views that academics have to deal with, and even non-academics who have published are actually seen also and then there's a lot of prestige attached to publications, whether or not they are in high impact journals. A lot of prestige, and a lot of times when there are people who say, "I love research, I've done research," what then the next thing you want to see is, where have they published this research? You understand? And so we are all caught up in that same aura of prestige and currency, because that is the currency that institutions are using to judge your work, to promote you, to give you salary raises, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the change. We can individually change in terms of not publishing in scientific journals or to publish in local journals, and that's something that can be done. But then the prestige and the acceptance of these publications by institutions is an issue. There are institutions that will not accept publications that, in journals that are not indexed in PubMed or Medline. So it goes, there's a lot that flows down from there.
Can I answer that now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So even our national journals, both of them are indexed. They may not have, those stratospheric impact factors. The highest impact factor is by NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, right? It is around 75 or 80. Okay. And it belongs to which organization? It belongs to local Boston Medical Association. It is not even journal of the National AMA, American Medical Association, that is JAMA. So why can't we strengthen our own national journals so they reach these heights? That is what I am aiming for. In a utopian world, my journal would be at par, if not at par, comparable to another international journals. And that is where we are lagging behind. We are running after those elite journals and they keep rejecting our papers. And then as a second, third, fourth option, we are giving it to our national journals. That is the call which I am making, that don't depend on those journals. Strengthen your own national journals. We can do it. If my best paper is published in my national journals, it will be accessed many times, it will be cited many times, and the impact factor of my national journal would go up. It may take a few years, but it is not impossible, and we have to dream after all.
I agree with you on that. I was talking about using the social media and other places as an outlet for publication.
That paper after it has been published. I disseminate the paper via the social media.
Right.
I'm not writing
so let me,
blog. I'm not writing.
Can I jump in as the person who asked the question?
Penny, hold on a second. I want to pick some participant comments. Otherwise, we may not get to that. So just hold on just 1 second, please. 1 second. So we do have a comment from Tina B. One persistent irritant for my research team is that local journals aren't indexed in PubMed, despite being widely read and published in English. Has anyone had experience advocating for a local journal to be indexed in PubMed? Apparently there's a process, but I'm just learning about it. So, but this is one of the things. Why should it be indexed in PubMed for it to be important? You know, so we have to now throw that question back. Some people make arguments of predatory journals, and that's an issue for a completely different satellite. But there are predatory journals indexed in PubMed, believe you me. So we have to even ask that question, that why should that be discounted if it's not in PubMed? So that's my comment on that. Then let me pick one more participant comment. Are there alternative authorship guidelines that do a better job of fully capturing the ways people contribute to work? For example, I've heard of Project Credit. Prof. Sharma, did you want to answer that, or should I go ahead and answer that?
Please go ahead.
So actually, if you, for this is an anonymous attendee on the Q&A, if you wait till the next presentation, you might get more clarity on that, because they're going to talk about different ways in which, no matter what guidelines you use for authorship, you can be reflexive about equity in authorship credit. So I'll wait till we get to the next panel to discuss that. So Penny, please go ahead.
Sorry, there are some other questions there on the Q&A. Please deal
yes
with them.
Okay, so you want me to complete those? Okay, I'll do that. I thought you had like a burning question. So let's see. So there's Lotta van der Haar from Utrecht University. Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I'm working in the field of development economics, but I think the issues raised are similar in this field, if not worse. An argument I often hear from authors in high-income countries is to not include co-authors from LMIC is that they do not know where to find partners for their research in LMIC. What counter-argument can we present to those researchers? So the HIC authors are saying that I believe they meaning the HIC authors, do not know where to find partners for their research in LMIC. Prof. Sharma, do you want to take that question?
I'm not sure what they are asking. Authors
I think I get what they're asking. So they're saying that HIC say they don't include LMIC people in their work because they can't find LMIC partners. But then how do you do LMIC research if you did not find LMIC partners? I mean, there's no way you can waltz into a country and do this work. However, there have been many people who've published such papers without a single LMIC person and the authorship or even acknowledged. And there have been some of these, so people are being more vigilant and especially calling these out, especially on social media. We've had some papers retracted from journals because people from the global south, from those particular countries or regions, found these papers and said this is absolutely unacceptable. and put pressure on the journals that publish them. And some of these journals did retract these papers. What we are trying to say is that it should not get to that point. We should not have to do this, right? And the next panel is going to address this quite nicely. So one last anonymous question. Do you have comments or thoughts on the inclusion of the Ministry of Health or government officials as authors, when often they might not contribute directly to the work, but rather their inclusion is assumed to lead to continued support of the program? That's the research program or health program.
Let me take this one.
Yes.
This is one of my another one of my favorite question, and I have a term for it. It is called multi-authoritis giftosa. Multi-authoritis giftosa. Okay. You are giving authorship as a gift to your professor, your head of the department, and maybe whosoever can help you in your next paper or getting a grant. It is totally unfair, but maybe practical in certain reasons. When you are younger, when you are trying to curry favor, sometimes you have to probably, but I have not done it, and I have paid a heavy price for it also. I know a number of my colleagues who have been very inflexible on this issue, and all of us have paid a heavy price for it. So I leave it to an individual person. If he wants to give some authorship to his boss or to leader or head of department, it's okay. After all, he has to survive, and he knows his exact conditions better. I have not done it, but I have been made to suffer repeatedly. Repeatedly.
Yeah. And I have similar answer to yours. However, there are times when these Ministry of Health officials actually do contribute, as in giving you, again, very contextual information and technical support in implementing your program, versus simply saying, if you don't put their name, it's not going to happen. And that's something that happens a lot as well. And that can generate a whole different discussion. But I agree with your take on that, Prof. Sharma. Our time is basically run out, and I would like to actually wrap up now so that we can have time for the next two panels. But thank you so much, Prof. Sharma, and thank you, Penny, also for dropping your questions.
One comment from Dr. Robinson, I think. It is not in the Q&A, it is in chat, but it's an important comment.
Okay, go ahead. I'm seeing, did she put it? Julia, did you want to pose the question or make your comment? I'm not seeing it in my chat.
Has there been an analysis done on which aspects of peer review that receive the most negative critique? For example, is it the methodology or the data analysis or the data interpretation? Can I take that? Can I take
yes,
that?
Please. Yes, please. I have some buffer time.
Yeah, for last 20 odd years, I have been working in editorial capacity in various journals. And you have put number 1, 2, and 3 exactly. The major criticism is for methodology. The next one is for analysis. And finally, the interpretation part. Interpretation comes in discussion, but most of the papers are rejected, if I may say that, because they have poor method section. See, anything else you can improve, modify and improve. But if your methods are wrong, then you can't help the paper. So I think I've got your question right. I hope this is the answer you wanted.
I agree with you, Prof. Sharma. There are cases where, for example, we don't have the infrastructure to do the fancy tests needed, say for a paper based on clinical outcomes of disease XYZ. Meanwhile, we have in the Global South, the largest populations of people, unfortunately, affected by this disease. But because we couldn't do the PCR or the enzyme binding fancy test, but we had some simpler studies or simpler labs that we've described, the editors will tell you, well, there's no PCR test to really confirm that they have this. Meanwhile, we in the Global South have used simpler tests and clinical expertise to diagnose this disease, and your paper gets thrown in the trash because you didn't do a PCR. There's no way I can do a PCR. We don't have that infrastructure. So these are some of the things that really put us out and really upset us. But if you send it to a local journal, as you said, they completely understand what is available. And they completely understand the expertise, the clinical expertise that can can describe this disease. So yeah,
Professor
thank
Cotton
you so
was
much.
with us, if Professor Cotton was with us, that is how we are
Yes.
running the topical doctor. We give
Yes.
more stress because our readers are there. The target audience is there. They don't have PCR. They don't have CT scan. They don't have MRI. So there is always scope for journals, local journals, where you can accommodate clinically important observational studies. It doesn't have to be, you know, hi-fi molecular biology stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. We can, there's some more comments from Julia, but we'll attend to them a bit later. Let's move on to panel. Thank you so much for an active and energetic conversation, Prof. Sharma. It's a pity Prof. Cotton couldn't make it. But now let's move to, we actually have a break now. Yes, we have a break now, but in that break, so we will come back. Let me make sure. From the break, we will come back at, if it's US Eastern Time, 1:35 p.m. If it's GMT, and you have the multi-time zone document and the agenda with you. If it's GMT, it's 5:35 p.m. And if it's South African time, it's 7:35 p.m. to start panel 3. But I do want to take a couple of the comments if you want to stay on for the break. And let me just add that please complete the participant survey. It will be really helpful for us to get more information on who the participants are, where you're coming from, your background, and your global health interests. So please take this time to fill that out. But in the meantime, I will just use the break to address a couple more comments. So Julia says here that one additional note in terms of reasons that papers are rejected includes improper or incomplete ethics processes or reporting, including ensuring local IRB approval. And I think on the Global South aspect of that, we need to learn more about the ethics of research. I don't think that is a Global South, Global North issue in itself, into how we have that captured and how we get it moving along can differ depending on where you are. In my experience working in the Global South, getting IRB review, appropriate IRB review, it's a huge headache. It can, for some institutions, be extremely costly. They charge an arm and a leg because it becomes a fund generating kind of outlet. And it can take forever. And it becomes really an exercise in checking a box rather than an exercise in protecting, in participant safety and conducting ethical human subjects research. And that's another thing that we could have a whole seminar on. I see Prof. Cotton here. I was going to ask him if he had some comments, but he's gotten up. If he comes back soon enough, I'll ask him to make some comments. Let me see if we have any questions that are still pending from our Q&A. Noting that we will have to come back on the 35. So we have about 8 minutes left to end the break. So I know our panel 3 speakers are getting ready. So let's see if there are any Q&As in there. I think I've addressed the Q&As in the Q&A section. Is there any other question from the panelists or from the participants, at least that on the sessions we've had so far? I know we're on a break, but I really was waiting for Prof. Cotton to come and make some comments.
Cotton actually logged in and just logged out again before I could. I sent a message to him. He might have forgotten it, the time or something like that, probably. I have a comment from Munira. She's feeling sorry for me because I paid a heavy price for not including my heads of the department when they were not actually contributing authors.
That's academic suicide sometimes.
I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. I didn't want to do something wrong. That is all. I didn't want to do something wrong. And I'm happy that I took a stand on that issue, because the earlier you tackle the bullies, the better it is in your life. And bullies have to be tackled on day one. If you tackle them, most of them are cowards and they back off once you tackle them.
You're right about that. So I'm just, so we'll wait for a few more minutes. as we are on break right now, so we can all take a little bit of a breather and come back in about 6 minutes. Thanks so much, Prof. Sharma.
Yeah, Dr. Nadia, I was hoping we take more questions from the audience.
Yeah, I'm just waiting. I haven't seen any.
Yeah, let's try to give more time and space to them.
Yeah, so let's see. So we've addressed all of those already.
Yeah, the ethical point which you said is very correct one, because when we simplify an operation, we want to take ethical permission. Sometimes it becomes too much. Simplifying the operation is easier than getting the ethical permission. But then ethical permission is there for a reason.
Yes, I mean, it is.
Yeah, without that, you can't. And I always say, if the philanthropics are doing the surgery, then the skeptics have to do the ethics. If I'm doing it as a philanthropist, I might get carried away. Even though there is altruism in my heart, I might get carried. We need those ethical committee people, and we need them to be very skeptical. So I'm not 100% sure, I'm 200% sure of the ethics. And ethics, that committee is not only protecting the interest of the patient, it is protecting me also if something goes wrong.
Yes. So yes, and that is one of the ways. Yeah. And that's one of the ways we can have more equity in Global South research. The Global South ethical review process and access should be strengthened to protect the interest of the people. This is how sometimes unethical research and frankly harmful research is conducted among people in the Global South, and lack of it. But then on the flip side, there are instances where the ethical process is used as a power wielding approach rather than a participant protection approach, which also really concerns me on the part of Global South. And most of what we are discussing today in the satellite session today is for Global South considerations, Global South point of view, Global South action.
I don't mind very strong and very harsh ethical committee. I'm ready to face that. And I have science to, if I have science to back my hypothesis, I'll convince them, if not on the first day, then on the second day, if not on the third day. But I don't want a weak ethical committee which cannot protect my patient's interest.
Absolutely.
Ethical committee, by virtue of being ethical committee, it has to be skeptical and it has to be harsh. Welcome, sir. Professor Cotton.
Hello, sorry, apologies for my late arrival.
You are again traveling?
Yes.
And so you're in a train. Welcome, Prof. Cotton. So we just about wrapped this session up, but we have like 3 minutes left in the break. If you'd want to make some comments of your own regarding our session on more equitable local authorship, and on using the ICMJE criteria to expand rather than exclude authorship, please go ahead and make some comments if you'd like to.
Sir, if you did not attend the session, one question which we were anticipating is how do we help those authors who are coming from, who don't write well? How do we help their science and how do we help their language? And this is what we have been doing for last couple of years at Tropical Doctor, sir. Please give your opinion on that, how we are helping those authors. I think that's a critical question.
Thank you for that. I think perhaps Tropical Doctor might be unique in the sense that we do not ever reject a paper on the basis of its English alone. Now, you may think, therefore, that people submit their articles in Serbo-Croat or other languages. That's not quite the case. Is there that we do not feel that an article has in good English, as long as the science and the medicine and the argument and the purport of the article is sound, then we will take it on. And our editorial board, which unfortunately is mainly me, will rewrite it accordingly to make it acceptable for an English language journal. I feel strongly that this is necessary because it gives a voice to the voiceless. And I've never had any authors object to changes of the English. It's scrupulously done so that the argument is not changed. And in fact, I was very happy to receive a very effusive thank you from a correspondent in Nicaragua, who said his paper had never seen such careful review.
Thank you for that, Prof. Cotton. And certainly as a reviewer myself, there are times when, and I have friends who are editors-in-chief, so there's an advantage and disadvantage to that because they keep sending you papers to review. And there are times when I find it hard to review a paper on the science alone. A lot of times by the time I'm done reviewing, I have made feedback for, you know, prose and sentence structure and syntax and all that. And by the time I'm done, I'm like, I've done enough to be a co-author on this paper, but good on them that, yeah. And I mean, and when the editors-in-chief see that, they're like, okay, let's send her another one.
Well, I think that's important. I mean, if it encourages the authors to produce another paper, so be it, and all the better, because that's ultimately what we want. The difficulty is when the argument is poor, the subject matter is not good, or what we receive a lot of times is case reports of rare and wonderful events. Now, unless these have got an actual message or learning point, it's in the realm of the so what, unfortunately. Very interesting. I love reading some of these tales of either of woe or excitement, but it doesn't go in our journal, certainly. There are case report journals, but unfortunately, what I battled strongly and hard against is open access, because I think it's a con. I believe that open access basically means open access for the wealthy and not for the less endowed, because the transfer financially is made from subscriptions to author contributions, which is wrong in my view. And therefore, there's a plethora of open access journals, and one begins to wonder whether many of these journals are actually reviewed at all.
Yes, and that's why some of these are predatory journals that are there to really just make money, and not necessarily to share good science.
Exactly, and I think the time has come for a sort of accreditation of journals.
Yeah. But thank you, Prof. Cotton. We'll have to wrap this up since we are going into panel 3 time. But thank you so much for making it, and please do stay with us even as you're on the train if you are able to. Thank you so much. So we're going to move to panel 3, and this is where we'll be discussing the very just excellent consensus statement on measures to promote equitable authorship of research publications from international partnerships. And I know there are some people who have had questions that would be relevant, would be in the sphere of what this paper covered. And so I've already introduced Prof. Refilwe Masekela, and then Angela Obasi and Shea Bimbola will not be here, but we do have a discussant, excellent discussant, who is also joining this panel in the person of Julia Robinson, who is the executive editor for the Open Access Journal, speaking of open access, plus Global Public Health. But this is a different journal, and she'll say more about it as we discuss in this panel. So she earned a Master's of Social Work and a Master's of Public Health at the University of Washington in the US. Before joining PLOS in 2020, Julia managed HIV programs and research in Cote d'Ivoire and is active in global health policy and advocacy work. So what we're going to do now is to hand it over to me as the moderator for this session. So what we'll do now is to have Refilwe go ahead and present their PowerPoint that embodies what this paper was about. And then we'll have a poll to follow that, and then have a discussion and Q&A. So over to you, Refilwe.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes.
So today, yeah, thanks. Today I'm going to share, this consensus statement that we wrote on measures to promote equitable authorships in research publication between international partners. This was actually published in Anesthesia. If you have any questions related to this, I'm happy to take those at the end. So I thought that I would start off this discussion to just give a brief background about why we decided to write this publication. When we went through the literature around global health and international partnerships, we thought it was important to really have some definitions in hand in terms of what's global health, what is helicopter or parachute research. I think that's already been discussed previously, to really look at the research ecosystem. And the focus of our paper was really aimed at journal editors. And I'll just discuss this ecosystem in some detail to really have people understand why we chose this as a focus of this statement. And I'll just go briefly into why we developed the statement. We'll use Africa as a case study, as well as really going into the statements, the reflexivity statements themselves. So I think to this audience, global health is, as a definition, it's an area of study and research and practice which places priority on really improving health and achieving equity in health for all people worldwide. I think really the essence in international partnerships, I think people go in with very altruistic reasons, and partnerships usually start well, and unfortunately they may not end well, as Nadia has described with regards to the authorships. So parachute research is really research which is predominantly conducted in low-middle countries, and there's really very little or inadequate recognition of the contribution of the local staff, the researchers, as well as the infrastructure that supported that research. Now, when we look at the research ecosystem, there are a number of players, and these players have a number of roles. And also, if you look at the way I've put this cartoon together, I've tried to highlight using the size, the magnitude of power that's held by various players in this ecosystem. We'd have the funders, as well as high-income country governments. These are really the people who have the money. And you will see that in most of these funders, as well as the governments, have bi-directional relationships with each other. The funders have relationships with high-income country researchers, who usually are the people who set the research priorities. Of course, there would be some input from the funders as well as government, but the journals themselves, the journal editors, have really got quite a lot of power in this research ecosystem. I think Nadia has alluded to the fact that if we look at why research is so important for people in academia, academic research, publications is really the currency that is used in order to really gauge one's impact, gauge one's decide on whether you will be promoted that would also decide on whether you will get even more funding. So grant funders also look at your publication record, your impact, etc. So it cannot be emphasized really the key role that journals play in this ecosystem. And whether they choose to accept or reject your publication has got real implication for an individual researcher. But if we look at the low middle income country researchers, because of the issues around funding, priority setting of agendas is usually set by high income country researchers who have the funding, and usually there's very little input as well as positionality and power in these low middle income country researchers, or so-called global south. So why did we develop this statement? Because we know that up to so far, academic journals have really not, as a collective, developed any kind of policy or guideline around parachute research, really. And we thought it was important for us to really start not only the conversation, but also provide some sort of solution as to how this can be tackled at the journal editor level to avoid the parachute research, as well as to really move the discussion forward and shift the needle to try to find a solution that would support equity in the global health research arena. So how we did this is this was started in 2020, so this was really at the height of COVID. So all these, we held a series of workshops. We had 3 workshops in total. All these were held online, and we had a number of workshops. Through these workshops, we initially decided on definitions, broke up the criteria that we decided on into sections, and worked in teams to really put this consensus statement together. And finally, the consensus statement, as well as the reflexivity statements, were peer reviewed by experts in global health and some senior journal editors. And really, the team that was involved in this is really researchers from the global south, researchers who work in research institutes, journal editors from both the global north and south. So it was a real blend of individuals who worked in the statement. Now, when we really looked in terms of the definitions in terms of the research ecosystem, the one that we found was the Wellcome Trust, which really described the research ecosystem in terms of the constituent elements in the ecosystem, which includes the researchers, their outputs, managers, institutes, funders, governments, policymakers, communication specialists, as well as the private sector. But we, as we were looking at this from an equity perspective, we really proposed that perhaps a way we could describe this research ecosystem was like this. We thought that it is a dynamic system, which includes both local, national, and international institutions, as well as actors that are involved in both the commissioning of research, its generation, management, how it's curated, how it's disseminated, how it's consumed, and who all these various actors have very varying interests. They have different types and levels of capitals, as well as linked and affected by really these feedback loops of power and influence. And really, this is acknowledging that power dynamics within this research ecosystem, and this may be not only in the global south, but also global north. We've also heard about minorities, females, etc. So this would encompass the whole ecosystem. So why Africa? This is purely because the collaborators in this team were mostly from Africa. We know that Africa has over 1 billion people, and it comprises 15% of the world population. The burden of disease is so about 1/4 of the global burden of disease rests in Africa, and that's no surprise, because if you look at the world map, this is grading countries into income levels, you'll see that Africa, which is shown there in maroon, has the most countries that are classified as low-income countries. But if you look at the research output, the productivity of Africa is probably the lowest in terms of continents. We only produce actually less than 2% of the world's research output is based in Africa. So this has been borne out in a number of publications, which showing that if we look at low middle income country research authorships, Africa actually does the worst when compared to other low income countries like South Asia and Southeast Asia. So the challenges are quite broad and all encompassing. So if we look at a macro level challenges that low middle income country researchers faced, it's linked to access to funding, that they can fund their own research, because many African countries don't actually contribute significantly in terms of the required 1% of GDP. Finance and support infrastructure, both for grants management as well as administrative support, is really lacking in many institutions in Africa. And if we look at the micro level, again, people have huge workloads, clinical loads, huge administrative workloads. This issue of salaries was also addressed by Dr. Sharma, and the issue of retention becomes significant. Once people become more productive, they generally try to find greener pastures where they can get more support with regards to their research and more productive time. So this issue of the brain drain is then continuous. And if we look at the inequities, if people are actually acknowledged in these global health partnerships, if people are low middle income country researchers are included, they have the stuck in the middle phenomenon, which, as we well know, that in terms of academic promotion, if you don't get that coveted first authorship or senior authorships, the currency of your contribution is also valued much less. So again, another key issue that needs to be addressed, that although people may be included, their positionality in terms of authorship also needs to be addressed. And of course, there's also issues around lack of data ownership, poor representation of underrepresented groups, especially early career researchers. And again, even in collaborations, there's usually challenges around unequal pay structures for both the northern and southern partners. So the statement, what guidances did we provide? So we really looked at this from two lenses. We first proposed that there are a number of reflexivity statements that authors should answer pre-publication, and then I'm going to go into the ones that we looked at with regards to the editors. So we really used the criteria, the International Committee on Medical Journal edited type of criteria to give these statements. So you'll see that we really want the authors to answer questions around the conceptualization of the study, whether the study really addresses local research priorities, and whether there was really co-design of the study between the two partners, and how were the local researchers involved in the study design, which is really key in terms of really conducting relevant research that's relevant to the local context. Questions around research management, whether funding is supportive of the local research teams, not just paying PIs, but also looking at funding for support for finance management, for example. How the data was acquired and analyzed, whether the staff that really collected the data were acknowledged, as I think Nadia has already talked about, how the members of the team actually have access to the study data from the low middle income country partnerships, and if there was any attempt to develop analytical skills within the partnership, which we discussed with regards to the data analysis, as well as upskilling of statistical analysis in the with the low middle income country partners. Around data interpretation, whether there was any collaborator, whether the two partners collaborated to interpret the data, and then the key issues around drafting and revising of the intellectual content. You've heard about Nadia talking about focus groups to really do the discussion of a paper. We think that's also very important. Using other means if people cannot speak English, but finding other tools to be more inclusive rather than exclusive in terms of ensuring that there's equity. Looking at the authorships, whether there's any gender balance within the authorships, whether there's inclusion of early career researchers, and again, also addressing the issue of whether any of the local low-middle country partners have a senior or first author position, and if so, why not? And then, of course, issues of training, whether there was any training, especially for early career researchers, any improvements to local infrastructure, as well as governance. Of course, not all studies would all of these be relevant, but of course, really large studies would probably be relevant. But if it's a smaller study with less funding, perhaps other criteria would not be relevant. Again, what we propose for the editors themselves, they should look at issues of engagement, whether there was engagement which is constructive when they were addressing the reflexivity statements from the authors themselves, issues of co-development, whether the study was co-developed or whether there was just a study idea that's coming from the global north partner and addressed and done just conducted in the global south. And whether this was priority research questions that really need to be answered in that context. Questions around authorship, which I've talked about, whether there's an LMIC partner who's a first or last author, and any early career researchers. And then most importantly around dissemination, the issue of open access, particularly where low middle income country partners are involved. Publication should be open access, so they can also be shared back to the communities where the data is actually generated, so that the people in whom the study is conducted can actually have equal benefit to access to the data. So these are just some of the guidance documents that we also looked at when we were developing the reflexivity statements, and just to acknowledge my co-authors and collaborators who all work together to develop this work. And I think one thing that I just wanted to mention that we really stressed was that journal editors should also consider removing these arbitrary numbers of authors. That's the first thing, and also consider multiple first and last authorships to encourage that low middle income country researchers be included. And in this consensus statement, we had first 3 authors and first senior authors. So that was also, we did something that we were recommending that journal editors should also do. I will end there. Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Refilwe. So we'll continue from here and have the poll. So if we can have the poll questions put up, Refilwe can take us through those. And then after that, we'll have our discussion. So back to you.
Okay, so the question, the first one is, Africa comprises 15% of the world population. What proportion of world's research is generated in this region, whether it was 15, 10, 5, or 1%? The second question is, which of the following with regards to an academic career progression is a critical component in academia that can be influenced by journal editors? Research outputs, positioning of authorships in publications, representation of early career researchers in teams, or all of the above. Then the third question is, within the research ecosystem, which of the following actors has the least power within global health partnerships? Is it high income country partners, low middle income country partners, low-income country governments or the journal editors themselves. Apologies for the copy. Then within the consensus statement of the facility statements, which of the following proposed questions will need to be addressed by authors to show an equitable research ecosystem? Is it research governance, training within the collaboration, infrastructure support within the LMIC partners, or all of those above? And then the final question is, with regards to the suggestions for journal editors to support equitable global health partnerships, which of the following is suggested as enablers for these relationships? To ensure open access for publications for global North-South partnerships, to limit the number of senior authors from the global North, to use ICGME criteria to ensure all authors fulfill criteria to fulfill authorship criteria in publications in a rigid manner, or finally, to ensure at least 2 early career researchers are included in each publication of global health partnerships. I think we can maybe give everybody a minute or two to finalize the poll, and then we'll just wait for the responses. Nadia, I wonder if we shouldn't maybe tackle some questions in the meantime while waiting for the poll.
I think if we finish the poll first, and then we can open up the discussion, and I might have a few questions for you before we look at participant questions. But obviously, if there are a lot of participant questions, I'll just go straight to participant questions. So let's just wait a couple minutes to finish the panel and then see where we can go from there. Thank you.
Okay. So if we look at question 1, the majority of participants thought that contribution from this region was 1% in terms of research generation. About 15% thought it was equivalent to the population. So I think the majority chose option 1, which is correct. Which of the following with regards to academic career progression can be influenced by journal editors? Most of the participants, 82%, thought that all of the above, which is actually true. I see that of the people who made options, they said representation of early career researchers and teams wouldn't be influenced. But I think if we do think about the reflexivity statements, they could be influenced if the question is asked. Then question number 3 about the actors in the research ecosystem. The people with the least power is the low middle income country partners. And I think the majority of people chose that option as correct. And a few also thought low-income country governments were also correct. And then with regards to the reflexivity statements, which of the following proposed questions the authors would show equitable research? Most people thought all of the above, which is true. We hope that these statements would really address all the aspects in the ecosystem. And then the final question was the enablers to improve equitable partnerships. Ensure open access is correct, and I think most people chose that option. But again, I saw a few people also chose option D, around the ICJ and E criteria. But I think the provisor here, as we said in a very rigid way, I think we're just proposing that there's solutions or other innovations that could be used for participatory, that are more participatory, inclusive rather than exclusive. I think that addresses the.
Great, thank you, Refilwe. And you know what? There is one question in the Q&A that we can address and then move on to discussing other questions. So there's a question from Joël Dominique, who says, this is a very interesting presentation. I'm wondering how authorship compares to other means of recognizing research contributions. For example, the investigator may not receive a competitive salary, equipment or infrastructure may be old or not properly functioning, research support structures may not exist, there may be competing clinical or teaching expectations. From all of these elements that impact research outcomes, what would be the most meaningful change for investigators in LMICs? I have my own thoughts on that, but since this is your panel, I'm going to have you answer that first, Refilwe. And Julia, if you wanted to add that as well, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Nadia. I think this is a very interesting, very insightful question. And I think what I think we're really trying to stress is I think the first challenge is actually the distribution of money. You know, usually when there are these large grants, there's funding that's given, the bulk of the funding is actually spent where the work is not happening. So, you know, unless that issue is addressed and it's addressed in an honest way, that where the bulk of the work happens, where, and I think that starts with where the funding flows. I think the challenges, if you have to be a subcontractor of a research project, you're only funded for your time, perhaps. You're only funded for the field workers. You're not funded for that finance director that you have to talk to, that you have to, that has to take out their time to assist you. You're not funded for some equipment. So really, I think that the important message is the whole infrastructure and human resources around research should be funded, and it should be funded in an equitable way. Because what generally happens is the money flows to the north. We have huge research teams, we have huge finance teams, we have lots of HR that's included in the budget, and then most of the budget is actually spent where the work is not happening. I think the plea is that there should be equitable funding provided to support the work comprehensively. I think Nadia will also have some thoughts of her own, but I think that is key, and that's where this should start. That there should be real honest support. If research is taking place in a low middle income country, the research should really be funded adequately, and people should be paid the same. I think one of the challenges is people don't have the funding to pay for research time out, for example, because the type of money that they paid is too little to even cover someone to cover your clinic for a day a week, for example. So I think all that we're pleading that the whole infrastructure and support should really be honest and be sufficient to adequately fund the amount of work that will be done in the global south.
Thank you, Refilwe. Julia, do you want to take a stab at that before I say anything?
Sure. I mean, I absolutely agree with what you just said, Refilwe. I mean, that is the political economy of health way to interpret how this whole system works. And I think, and speaking from a publisher's perspective, the way that we can change the system is to say, researchers, you are responsible for reporting on this, and it will be paid attention to, and it will be assessed along with your outcomes and the overall results of your study. And so if you want your research to be able to be published with us, you must structure it in a way in which you can answer these questions honestly and that they will be received by the community in a just way. And so it's a bit of a long game with the reflexivity statement, with what PLOS is trying to implement as well. But that is where we hold power. We recognize as publishers, this is where we hold power, and we can change the system by implementing these reporting requirements. And it makes a huge difference, I think, and we'll probably get to talk about that a little bit later. But yes, I absolutely agree with everything you just said.
Yes, and I'll add here that the recognition for contribution to research, to me, you know, as framed in the question from Joelle, the issues of maybe competitive salaries, that's with respect to the project, not with the local investigators' regular job, with respect to engagement in the project, right? The equipment, but then the equipment infrastructure, research support structures, funding can be provided for those from indirect costs. And the rates of indirects that are afforded to LMIC institutions is incredibly and significantly lower than are allowed for the HIC institutions. So funding is being given with respect to large percentages for indirects for the HIC institutions to build their infrastructure. And then we often have to deal with 8 to 10% indirects for most of the grants that, you know, I write at least, on the local side, and it's really constraining. So if funders want to do more in that respect, they can institute higher percentages for indirects that will automatically actually increase our ability to put money into infrastructure. And then on top of that, actually hold the institutions, the local institutions to task for using those indirects to actually build infrastructure. And they don't necessarily have to be limited to there are types of the limited to infrastructure building grants. There are some grants like that, right? The D71s and the G11s. But that's as far as NIH is concerned. But to large other grants, whether it's training, whether it's research, and that then integrates the infrastructure building into grants that are not necessarily infrastructure building grants, but it's integrated in there. So that's what I'm going to add. And then the other thing is that if we are recognizing authorship for individual local contributors, the expanding the authorship to include them or appropriately include them should not be a quid pro quo for institutional building, for competitive salaries. If someone did contribute to the research, whether or not you are going to help them fix their equipment or infrastructure or recognize them otherwise, that's in my opinion, they should still be included as an author. Because people read these papers and will come back and say, Global South authors are not contributing to research. Global South authors are not generating new evidence. Meanwhile, they did, but they were not recognized. And bibliographic analyses are not going to capture their contribution if they are not listed as authors on the bylines. So my thing is that we need both. We build the infrastructure, give them competitive salaries and all that. But as long as they did contribute to the research, they should be recognized by name. So that's my input. All right. So there might be
one final thing to add with regards to funding. I think because remember I've talked about where the research priorities sit in. I really think that really the funders should really think about funding project co-development. Before even the protocol has been written, they should fund, you know, projects for collaborators to sit together and work out a locally relevant question. Because if that's not done, we'll always be complaining that we have studies that are done that have little local priority, that are not going to guide local policy, because there's no funding to actually fund that initial step of getting collaborators together in a room for them to really craft questions.
Thank you, Refilwe. Thanks for adding that point. So I'll go to some of the questions we wanted to field. I know we have a few minutes, but between, for Refilwe, how has this paper and the recommended reflexivity statements been received so far by journals and research groups, both formally or informally? How has this been received? What's the feedback you've been getting? And critiques, by the way, feedback or critiques.
Well, I think Professor Sharma also mentioned, I think there was a lot of interest on this when we went live on Twitter. We also had a very interesting webinar on this topic, which was initiated by the Journal of Anesthesia, which really generated quite a lot of interest, quite a lot of questions. And a number of journals have already decided to adopt, whether in some edited format, some of these reflexivity statements. For example, the Microbial Genomics Anesthesia Journal itself. And of course, what is also interesting is we also had a lot of interest from one of the funders. Wellcome was actually very interested in looking at these reflexivity statements. So I think in terms of dissemination and communication, we really had a lot of traction and a lot of interest, especially from the funders as well as journal editors, to just hear about these reflexivity statements. And I'm sure PLOS Journal had also looked at these as well. So I think from an uptake perspective, there's been, I think the debate has been opened, and I'm really quite pleased that there's been some editors that have already looked at adopting some of these principles into their, and really embedding them into their journal, into their journals.
Great. So I'm actually going to turn this to Julia now. Now, I know PLOS Global Health has been intentional about publishing equity. What are some of the measures you have taken as a journal? What are your thoughts on the author reflexivity statement, and whether and how journals such as yours would or should adopt it? Please give us some feedback on what PLOS Global Health has been doing about publishing equity, and your thoughts about this reflexivity statement from Refilwe and colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. So PLOS Global Public Health, we launched last year. We had the great privilege of being able to start from scratch. And so start from a place that we were able to center diversity, equity, and inclusion from the beginning. And that includes the choice of our editors-in-chief. We knew that if we chose the editors-in-chief from the Global North, that we were going to go on the same path that most journals have gone on before, because if you don't center leadership, then you're going to head in the same direction. So our editors-in-chief, who are Madhu Pai and Catherine Tabungi, we are able to structure our editorial board in a way that we were recruiting very intentionally academic editors from the Global South, thinking about a diversity of geographic region, thinking about a diversity of gender identity. And we've realized that these academic editors are the people who are going to assess the research. And so the research that ends up being published will be more diverse because we have more diverse people who are actually assessing it and making judgments and giving feedback on it. So those are some of the ways I think that we are structuring our assessment of the research that comes in through the front door. In terms of the ways that we are trying to really change the infrastructure, so we adopted last year, we adopted a policy on global research, inclusion in global research. So it's similar to the reflexivity statements. It's a little bit different. Across our portfolio of PLOS journal titles, we made it mandatory that any paper that comes in that has a first or last author that has an affiliation in a country other than where the research took place, they're required to fill out our questionnaire. And that questionnaire is assessed by the academic editor and the peer reviewers, and it is published along with the published research as supplementary information. So again, getting back to this kind of long game, I think that when we first introduced this, I think some authors who had been, doing intentionally or not parachute research had to report on things like, what was the inclusion of local collaborators? How will you disseminate this information back to the local community? And we had our academic editors really grill some of the authors and some of the feedback that they gave them. So it's been an interesting reception overall, overwhelmingly positive. I think this is something that the global health community has craved. And I think providing this level of structure and accountability is something that I believe will fundamentally change the way that global health research is done. And so we love being able to kind of do this in parallel with the reflexivity statements. We obviously, plus we're not implementing that exact protocol, but we are in close collaboration. And I know that our two teams are very interested in assessing how this is going after a year, after 18 months. So we will be doing that, I hope, in a collaborative way.
Thank you, Julia. And definitely, I think Plus Global Health starting from scratch was very intentional about this. You know, Amadou recruited me that, you know, directly. I had seen the calls for editors. I was like, I don't have time for this. You know, it's just going to be, you know, but he actually intentionally contacted me and said, I would like you to XYZ. And we had already had some, you know, collaboration or interaction before that. So when it was quite personal and very intentional. And so when we had our first sort of Zoom call, you know, for all the editors and editors in chief, and I was looking at the spectrum of people who are serving on the board, it was quite diverse, different backgrounds and whatnot. And I'd never really had that experience prior. So really, I can attest to the fact that it was at least extremely intentional. And from what Madupai told me, it wasn't easy to individually like search for people and so on and so forth. So kudos to your journal. We have gone over a little bit with this panel time, and I would like to introduce panel 4 so that we have time for that. But there might be a few more minutes at the end of after panel 4 is done to ask and answer some more questions. But certainly thank you to Refilwe and Shea and Angela who couldn't be here, and of course to Julia for your contributions to this panel. There's so much more I'm sure that we would love to ask you, but let's hold on and have panel 4 so that we can go from there. So what I will do now is introduce panel 4, which is, it's our cross-cutting panel where we talk about how can and how should Global South contributors prepare and position themselves in the process of decolonization in global health research. But we are looking at this from the standpoint of engaging and incorporating indigenous practice, indigenous health practice and knowledge into our research, and thereby engaging indigenous health practitioners into our research. So this is an intentional deep dive into epistemology itself, like what constitutes good information or good health information, that we need to widen the scope and make provide more value where we can pull from for indigenous practitioners to actually have a niche in our development of strategies for health and coverage of health for all. So the moderator will be Professor Fiemu Nwariaku, who is standing in for Prof. Echezona Ezianoloe, and I'll introduce him. He is a professor and executive vice chair in the Department of Surgery at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, where he holds the Malcolm Perry Professorship in Surgery. He serves as an associate dean for the Office of Global Health, seeking to expand the institutional mission by developing and supporting educational and research programs in global health. His clinical expertise is in endocrine surgery, including the surgical management of tumors of the adrenal, thyroid, and parathyroid glands, as well as neuroendocrine tumors of the pancreas. He earned his medical degree from the University College Hospital in Nigeria before going to UT Southwestern Medical School as a surgical resident. He has research interests in building capacity in human resources for health in Africa, South America, Asia, and the Middle East. He also has research interests in injury prevention and care in low and middle income countries. And for his research, he's had programs funded through the National Institute of Health's Fogarty Institute, especially for training up and coming early investigators. He's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and has been a past president of the Association for Academic Surgery. He also serves as the current treasurer for the Society of Black Academic Surgeons. So a warm welcome to Professor Fiemu Nwariaku, and here he is. So I will turn this over to you to introduce your panelists for a very, very, very exciting panel. So over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and I've followed the presentations back and forth over the last few hours. So it's really a privilege to be part of this. And this panel was, as I understand it, was basically to bring together all these wonderful ideas that folks have shared, and then give you a little bit of an example on just on a practical level on how one might begin to implement some of these thoughts. And it's my pleasure saying that to introduce Dr. Onyemechi, who is an orthopedic surgeon in Nigeria who had previously served as a scholar on one of our D43 training grants. Dr. Onyemechi is very interested in combining local expertise. And when I say local, I mean not just physician or healthcare local, but as you'll find out shortly, his work with traditional bone setters in the region as a way of improving the care of patients with traumatic fractures. So I will introduce Dr. Onyemechi, and then I'll have him introduce, I think he may have on the line representatives from that group as well. He has worked on this for the last several years, has great interest in this, and has published on it. So having said that, I'll open it up. Dr. Onyemechi, if you would like to take it from there and give us an introduction.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. This is Dr. Onyemechi from Enugu, Nigeria. I would like to introduce some of the traditional bone setters that are here with me. I have with me here, you can see the chairman of the Traditional Bone Setters Association in Enugu State, Nigeria, Chief Nadozie Anyamuleze. I'd like him to, greet the audience. Chief, can you say hi to the people? Just
okay.
Just
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Also in our midst this evening is also the vice chairman, a lady. I'm sure many of you will be surprised that the lady is traditional bone setters. In our midst also we have the vice chairman of the Traditional Bone Setters Association. Her name is Queen Chinelo Ezorakache. I would like her to say hi to the audience as well.
Hi.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this panel for inviting me and inviting my co-workers. And I have some slides to share. I hope I can go ahead to share the slides so that I can talk about a few things about what we've done in terms of incorporating local contributors into our global health research. Go ahead.
Please do so.
Okay. So, can you see my slide? Hello.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see. I can see your slides.
So there are two parts to the presentation I have. First, I'll talk about the traditional bone setters research that we've tried to do here in Enugu, which I think is a typical example of how local contributors, local traditional health practitioners can be engaged and recognized in global health research. Okay, I'll just say a few things about what is known about traditional bone setters in low and middle income countries. This is a bit technical, but just allow me to just spend a few minutes to lay a good foundation. It's important to note that traditional bone setters in low and middle income countries play a very important role in trauma care. Oftentimes, they provide up to 70 to 90% of primary fracture care to injured patients, and they have high patronage and confidence in our society, and this cuts across social and educational strata. Okay, here in Africa, there's a very strong sociocultural belief that the bone setters are actually better than the orthopedists. Okay, and this belief, is so deep that it has, contributed significantly to the high patronage of the bone setters that we see in our environment. And another reason why they are patronized is because they are considered to be cheaper and they are more accessible to the people. They are close to them in their local environments, and therefore they have easy access to them. Okay. However, a lot of them do not receive any formal training. They acquire their skills through apprenticeship from family members as a form of ancestral heritage. But we are beginning to see more sophisticated practice among the bone setters who now begin to use x-rays, analgesics, antibiotics, and even dressing in rendering care to their patients. And these treatments usually may not have, good scientific background, and many of them may be prone to complications. We now have a lot of, limb and life-threatening complications that are associated with their training. Now, from the systematic review that we published 2021, we found that the overall impact of that training is that, because of these complications, the overall impact has been found to be negative. And this has, greatly reversed the gains of orthodox fracture care in our sub-region. Now, talking about traditional bone setters research is actually a well-researched subject. However, there has been poor implementation of the research findings and recommendations, and this is where implementation science plays a very important role. Some of these, recommendations include, number one, improving access to modern orthopedic service, which is in short supply in most, LMICs, increasing universal health coverage, which is an issue for most governments in the low-income countries, training and micro-credentialing and regulating them, is also one of the recommendations, and incorporating them into the primary healthcare system, so that they can be part of the, regular, healthcare system is one of the recommendations, which is, the foundation of what we have been trying to do. All right. The interest and my motivation is actually drawn from clinical experience, both in training and in practice. We've seen quite a number of, problems arising from their practice, and we've tried to see how we can find some solutions to some of these problems. These are some of our infrastructure. I'll quickly go through that. There are critical stakeholders we have identified: the government, the orthopedics themselves. What is their attitude to the bone setters? Is it positive? Can we really allow them to practice at the low level in the primary health centers? The bone setters themselves, what is the attitude towards the orthodox practice? There must be a meeting point so that, this training and incorporation can happen. And then funded agencies and NGOs also have a very important role to play. Now, engaging with the bone setters, has not been a very easy task, because over the years, they see the orthodox practitioners as competitors. There's a lot of suspicion and distrust, which happens, occasionally, but through regular communication, we try to bridge some of these issues. And it's important to also know that the bone setters themselves have a very well, organized association called ASTRABON, Association of Traditional Bone Setters of Nigeria, and then, we've been trying to relate with them through the Ministry of Health in Enugu State, and we've had several meetings in mobilizing support and engagement. These are some of the pictures we took in some of our engagements. You can see the chairman and the vice and some of the members of the association. And, in trying to forge ahead, we try to engage them, in a focus group discussion to know actually what they feel about orthodox practice. How can orthodox practice help them? Do they really believe that orthodox practice can be of help to them? So we had this focus group discussion where about 5 of them attended. And some of the findings include the following: that number one, they still claim superiority over orthodox practice. Okay, they claim that they are, superior to orthodox practice, which is a belief that they strongly hold, they hold very strongly too. They also, a couple of them admit some shortcomings to their practice. Okay, actually seeking for further training in their trade so that they can improve their practice. A good number of them also expressed desire for formal training and recognition. Okay, they want to be recognized by the government. They want government to build, infrastructure for them so that they can actually advance their practice. And a good number of them also, express desire to have partnership that will provide equipment and infrastructure to improve their practice. So this is some of the, findings we got from that focus group discussion. And that actually helped to fashion, the specific aims and even our research strategy when we try to apply for grants to support this training. Now, moving forward, we try to pilot, a training of one of the, bone setters around the states. His name is CJ, found, one of the local governments in Enugu State. He has over 15 years of practice, about 43 years old. He had called me to come help him improve what he does in his setting. So we attended that, we honored that invitation. And then based on the findings we have from a systematic review, which identify very critical areas of improving, the practice of bone setters, which include instructional training, to improve infection control and prevention and control, splinting techniques, and also patient selection. Those were the focus of that training. And it was a very instructional training. You can see some of the pictures. Because of time, I'll just go through them very quickly. Now, what is the role of funding agencies? There's a huge funding gap in bone setters research in Africa, in Nigeria and other LMICs. Fracture is a very major problem. Road traffic accidents and injuries, continue to cause a lot of morbidity and mortality in our environment. And a huge number of these people will still patronize bone setters. And, we really need to do something to improve the outcome of their care. Okay, and preliminary data actually demonstrates that the feasibility and acceptability of formal training of bone setters. A lot of them are open to it, they're acceptable, is acceptable to them, and we want to use this as an opportunity to see how we can really improve the quality of care that we have. And we're also working on developing a curriculum for this training. However, funds are needed to drive this project further going forward. What are the next steps? We want to build a collaborative network of traditional bone setters within, we call it the Southern collaboration, within similar LMIC researchers who have similar experiences. We want to share our experiences, we want to learn from our past failures. Advocacy is one of the things we want to do, secure funding and see how we can train and link them to primary healthcare system. In conclusion, regarding the traditional bone setters research, bone setters have come to stay in Nigeria and most LMICs. They continue to provide primary fracture care to majority of patients in our environment. There's a huge patronage that is driven by sociocultural beliefs. This is very important. And the brain drain being, seen in Nigeria, will actually, worsen this patronage or increase this patronage. A lot of orthopedic surgeons are leaving Nigeria for greener pastures, so the few orthopedic surgeons, less than 500, to take care of over 200 million people. So this will worsen the doctor-patient ratio and then further, increase the patronage. We can't continue to ignore the bone setters. They have come to stay. We need to support them. We need to encourage what they are doing. We need to make it safer so that we can have better outcome of their care. Primary also that they are trainable and they are eager to learn. And that's one of the reasons they are here to join me in this panel. We should strongly advocate training and integration into the primary healthcare system. Thank you for listening. If we have time, I can go through some of our, ideas about how Global South contributors can prepare and position themselves in the process of decolonization of global health research. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Onyemechi, for that summary of your work. Congratulations. I think you've hit on a couple of things, which is the South-South collaboration that we've heard so much about, and the opportunity for us to own some of the work that we do locally. So I hope that during the question and answer session, you'll get a chance to share some of your other ideas. But I would like to throw this open now to discussion, and please use the chat box to send questions. While we're waiting on that, Onyemechi, one question that pops up with things like this is, your collaborators and your colleagues who are sitting with you there are clearly interested in improving the health of the local population. They may or may not have any interest in the academic components of global health. Can you share with us what types of incentives, what is it, if I may be blunt about it, one question might be, well, what is in this for them? What would they want to see as a way of recognizing their expertise and their impact in those communities, other than writing about the work that they do?
Okay, I think this is a very important question. I think one of the things they expect from this collaboration is that they want to, build capacity in terms of, further training. A good number of them have identified some gaps in knowledge in what they do, and they are hopeful that, if we're able to get funding to take this project forward, that will help to improve their capacity to deliver safer and more qualitative care. In addition to that, they are also looking forward to some form of financial incentives where they can have, some kind of funding to buy, equipment and materials that they use for their practice. So this is one of the things that they are hoping to get, from this kind of collaboration, some financial support to help them, improve in terms of the quality of care, the equipment that they use, and even build infrastructure. This is one of the things they tell me is very important and there to them. And also, fine, they're not academic, so authorship might not be a very important thing to them. But I think in these two areas, they are very hopeful that if, this collaboration gets funded, that they might be able to benefit, in those areas.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Can we have some other comments or questions, please, for the panelists in general and related matters? Dr. Sharma.
Thank you. Sir, I believe anything which can be done to retain the traditional knowledge should be encouraged. They have tremendous wisdom. They may not have the benefit of modern science, as we call it, but they have tremendous wisdom.
That's an important point, and that actually brings up another common question around this topic, which is how do you cross-train each other, Dr. Nyemachi? What do you learn from them? What do they learn from you? How do you exchange information and knowledge?
I think for now, the information is meant to flow from the orthodox to the traditional. We recognize the role they play as, in the community because of the high patronage. A good number of them, up to 70% of patients who have sustained fractures, will go to them. Okay, so we recognize the important role they play as far as fracture care is concerned in our local environment. And, because of some, occasional complications that, will arise because their methods are not very scientific, and some of these patients will eventually come over to us, for treatment. So we want to actually see if we can prevent some of these problems from occurring in the first place. And we identified 3 core areas that interventions can be focused on. Number 1 is patient selection. Okay, we want to teach them, to know the limits of the patient that they should be able to handle. If the patient has an open fracture, very extensive open fracture, it has no business being treated by the bone setters because of the obvious complications that may arise. The closed fractures can be well handled by them, so they can go ahead with those. Now, this next one is their splinting technique. How do they apply their local splint, which is the main focus of their treatment, is use of local splints to immobilize fractures. We also found from our systematic review that some of these splints oftentimes are applied too tightly, and that can actually give rise to a lot of complications, gangrene, ischemic contractures, and all of that. So we want to see how we can improve the application of their local splint so that that complication can be reduced. All right, and then again, I think these are the the main focus. Selection of patients, splinting techniques, and then infection prevention and control. So the flow of knowledge is actually meant to flow from the orthodox. Try to improve the scientific basis of some of the things they do, and then by so doing, we can improve the outcome and quality of care that they render to the patients, so that we can minimize the rates of complications from their practice.
Thank you for sharing that. That's actually a good segue into the next question, which is in the chat box, which is a concern is, how do you intend to scientifically investigate the methods and procedures used by the local bone setters?
Yeah, so we hope that through these regular interaction and meetings that we have, we need to understudy their techniques better. We need to understand the way they treat their patients, and by so doing, we can identify any scientific gaps in those treatment methods. And those gaps are the things we hope to fill by reason of this engagement, by reason of this training. We can fill those gaps, where their methods lack scientific basis, so that they can have a more scientific method of treating these patients in terms of how the fractures are immobilized, how often or how soon they are going to actually mobilize the patients, and all of that. So if we have more interaction, I hope to visit their shops, I hope to visit their training centers, their healing centers, and understudy some of the things they do. And hopefully, we understand better, the basis of what they are doing, and we can fill the scientific gaps that we have been able to identify. This hopefully will help to improve the quality of what they of practice that they have.
Thank you. Other questions?
I had a question.
Please.
So thanks, Dr. Ndubisi. So I wanted to ask, you had talked about the flow of information going from the orthodox to the traditional, but I want to ask the bone setters, and I'd like them to actually tell us where they see themselves in the niche of the, in the system, in the Nigerian health system right now. Where do they see themselves, and what do they think they have to contribute to people like yourself, who's an orthopedic surgeon?
Sorry, I need to interpret this to them in the local language.
Oh yeah, they are free to speak in Igbo, yes.
So they can understand the question. After answering it, I'll try to interpret it back to English to you. Does that make sense? All right. So,
absolutely, thank you.
Yeah. So Osi, kedebe unu fulu unu kita n'ife a na-eme ka esi agwọ ndị ọya, ka esi agba ọkpụkpụ, kedu ọnọdụ unu nọ kita nụnwa unu chọrọ maybe ka emela anyị. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Ekene gị. Ekene gị. Ife ị na-ekwuta ọmụtọ. Ọnọdụ anyị nọ taa, ọ na-enye m ọṅụ na onye a bụ Amaechi, ọ na-eme ọfụma, ọ nọ na nke oyibo, anyị nwa nọ na nke Igbo traditional one, ọ natarichi ka anyị na-eme, anyị wee sizi ka anyị mekọzie ọnụ ka ndị tradishọn, ndị na-agba ọkpụkpụ n'Igbo na ndị nke oyibo ka anyị bụrụ one. Maka anyị na-abụ ndị anyị tritiri, anyị adịghị ekwe ka aka ọtụa mmadụ ọkpa, ka ewere klọchị na-aga, maka onye aka tụrụ ọkpa adagwe ngwụrọ, ọ ngwụrọ ka ọ bụ. So anyị wee sị ka anyị na ndị Amaechi na ndị grup ya wee sị ka anyị ncha bụrụzie one, bụrụzie ofu. Onye butere anyị n'ụlọ ọgwụ nke anyị, ọ bụ na anyị ama mmenwu, anyị shift olufa farụa, onwekwa nke ewetara fa, onwekwa nke na-akarịfa fa na-ebutefa, mana anyị achọghịzị ka a na-ebute ya late. Anyị chọrọ ka ọ nọ ọnọdụ ka mmadụ ịṅụ iyi, onye mere mmadụ ọṅụrụ, onye abụọ ọya eje ọkụ mmụọ, so onye nwa ka anyị chọrọ ka anyị na fa bụ one.
Okay, so I'll try to interpret this. 2 or 3 points that he has been able to make. Number one is that they recognize that they hold a very important place as far as traditional care is concerned. And this is something that the local people here value so much. One is very accessible to them. They also consider it's cheaper and all of that. So, the patronage of traditional bone setters in our environment is quite high for this reason. So that is one position that they know they hold very strongly, that a lot of fracture patients will eventually come to them. However, they recognize the fact that, there are some of these patients that they may not be able to treat properly. Okay, they say that some of these patients that, they might find difficult to treat, such patients, they are willing to refer to the orthodox setting. But they know and recognize that they hold a very important place as far as fracture care is concerned in Nigeria and other LMICs. And this is actually a very important role that they play in our environment. We don't have enough orthopedic surgeons to treat all the fracture patients in Nigeria. That is the truth. We are less than 500 and we are taking care of over 200 people, 200 million people. So, certainly the hospitals and the orthodox settings will not be able to cope with the volume of fracture patients that we have. So many of them will actually get treated by them. That is a position and a status they know very well and they hold very strongly. However, they recognize some of the deficiencies in their practice, which they are willing to improve upon if we are able to forge this partnership, together, moving forward, so that there can be some, cross, fertilization of ideas and transference of skills and knowledge, which is something they also recognize.
Thank you. There's a comment in the box that documentation is very important, meaning that even though there are gaps, that since the traditional bone setters account for a significant proportion of the fracture care that's delivered, there's a concern that that wealth of knowledge might be lost if it's not transferred to the next generation. So that's a comment from one of the participants. I don't think it requires a response, but if you choose to respond, that's fine too.
Yeah, it is a comment, not a question, really. So
yeah. So
yeah, I think I agree with them. I think I agree with him.
Okay. Any other questions for the panelists more broadly? We've had a lot of discussion about, I have several points here, but I think we've addressed a number of them. One of them is just how we build capacity in the areas where we think our South collaborators may not be seen as experienced and therefore intentionally or unintentionally excluded from authorship. And those are things around study design, data analysis, and writing. Some of you have talked about that. Nadia, I see you nodding your head. So if you want to comment, I think some practical ways of building, I mean, clearly those are opportunities for building capacity, but if you have specific thoughts about that, that would help in the future prevent some of the exclusion that we see that's sometimes used.
Thank you so much, Fiamon. So the point that we wanted to also have run through this whole satellite was also for Global South contributors, and we intentionally use the word contributors because they are academic, non-academic, community, institutional contributors. There's a whole spectrum of contributors. The bone setters you are sitting with are contributors in the research that NDBC is doing. But for us also to be aware of what constitutes authorship, what constitutes research, what are the elements of research, you cannot engage in self-determinism and improving your participation and recognition, your leadership, without knowing the scope of the field that you're going into, which is global health research in general. So part of what this satellite was to do was also to educate the group of global analysts wide about what constitutes authorship. That's why we broke down the ICMJE criteria, but then to also say that they can be expanded or applied or interpreted in such a way that your contribution can be captured, your name can be listed. And the questions and the comments also bring about discussion and increased knowledge in this field. So some practical things that, and I've written about this before in like a separate, not even a journal article, but a blog basically, to say we should actually prepare ourselves to be less likely to be excluded. If someone has a bias against you, obviously it will work against you, but let's prepare ourselves to be more ready to even better contribute to a point that we cannot be ignored. So some of those things of learning data analysis. I'm not a statistician, I've never been a statistician, but I've learned enough statistics that I can have conversations with statisticians, right? So in different fields, learning about all of these things. And one of the things I tell local contributors at least is to access research ethics training, or especially say, if you see the building here, that's the Institute of Human Virology, Nigeria. We have public health officials, we have public health personnel and early learners in public health, not necessarily research, but I say that anyone who's working with me, whether in my public health team or my research team, everybody needs to do ethics training. It gives you an idea of what it constitutes and what is needed, so that when we have to turn program into research or go from research into program, everybody has an idea of what is program evaluation versus what is research. So making yourself ready, learning the ethics guidelines. Nigeria has its own code of research ethics guidelines. It's very short. Reading it, understanding what the National Ethics Committee requires. And also reading more, and blogs from global health journals are better if you have problems reading the very, complicated publications that come. You can read their blogs and understand a little bit more about this field. So making yourself hungry and ready to be involved and engaged would actually also, from your own standpoint, pragmatically, making yourself have more participation, leadership, and being recognized. So I think I'll stop there with my contribution.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, it looks like we're almost at the end of the session. So I think if there are no other questions I can see, I'd like, if you would, I want to thank all the panelists, and including our collaborators with you there, Dr. Onyemaechi. If you let them know, we're grateful for their contributions as well. And Nadia, if you'd like to wrap it up, I will say thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. There's a comment in the Q&A. This has been an outstanding session. Thank you. I think all of these this is from Lacey Ahan. I think all of these topics are crucial for global health focused students in high income countries. Needs to be part of their training, as they are the ones who will hopefully start their careers with a more equitable approach to working with colleagues in LMICs. This is the responsibility of the head of these programs to reset this paradigm with their programs and students, but any advice you have are welcome. I mean, you've given excellent advice, Lacey, and I thank you for that. There's a proverb that we have, I'm not going to say it in my language, but we say that every good leader has once been a great follower. Every good leader has once been a great follower. And if you put it in this context, every great global health leader has once been a great student or trainee. So if we have the students learning early about equity, imagine when they get into leadership that we don't have to have papers being retracted or don't have to have these things happening in collaborations in which you are leading. And so we really appreciate that there are students in this satellite who have also learned both on the global south and global north end. I'd also invite other panelists to add last comments before we wrap up. Any other panelists want to say something? Panelists and moderators.
It has been a pleasure, Dr. Nadia. Great pleasure.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm just going to thank everybody, our attendees, participants. Thank you so much. Please and kindly complete the survey. Eze, please type in the survey or put the link there for everyone. Please complete it so we have an idea of who was attending and what their background was. It's really helpful. And then I'd like to thank Eze. Eze, I want you to be on camera because Eze has been our admin and has been just excellent. So Eze, I'd like you to say hi as well, to come on camera and say hello if you are able to. He's still hiding behind the camera. Eze, can you say hello?
Hi, sorry, it's dark over here. Let me start by.
So, okay, while he's getting ready, let's see, I think it's coming up. All right, thank you, Eze. Yeah. He's the whiz guy behind all of this, organizing everything. So thank you very much for your support and herding all of the cats here. I appreciate that. And then I thank all our panelists from panel 1, 2, 3, 4, and everyone who is still left here, Prof. Cotton, Indubuisi, our bone setters from Enugu, hello. And then Prof. Fiamo as well, Prof. Sharma, Penny Holding, Refiloe, Prof. Refiloe, and of course, Julia, who is still here, and as well as our CUGH technical support, Cassidy. Thank you so much, everybody. We will make sure that we have the recordings that will be coming from CUGH, and we'll also provide them collated slides to be put on the registration site, but it might not be immediately, so please bear with us as we get them together. But so with that, I'm going to close this satellite. It's been a great learning experience. Fill the survey, please, copy, paste, and fill. Thank you all, and have a great night and great morning, everyone.